Yes, there we go. All right. So looks like we've got 6 in the group, and I'm in a different location this time. I've merged bubbles. So I'm now in Mount Albert, so it's actually kind of nice to get out a little bit and be somewhere different. So round 2, I think the first session was sounds like it's pretty thought provoking. I know there's quite a few conversations kind of like after the fact, folks just having conversations and kind of getting into that thinking about defense, which I think is really, really, really important. What I'd like to kind of do at the beginning is really just kind of have a little bit of a reflection on the first one, plus some of the stuff we've sent out. And I just think it would be a good way to kind of prime us and get us thinking a little bit about what's happening for this one, and prepare us for some of the content that Matt's created. So since we have a small group, I think it actually works well to stay in this group. And we'll kind of just do this on a volunteer basis. We'd love to hear from everybody. And I guess the question that really, to kind of get that rolling is, wanting to hear, what was your defensive philosophy this year? Just kind of like, what did you do? Like, no right or wrong, just like, what did you do this year with your Harbor team? And if you could do it again and start over, what would you keep and what would you do differently? So kind of quite general. You can kind of stay quite high level, or go as in depth as you want it to be. You can kind of take that any direction. But anyone immediately react to saying, "Ooh, I want to share kind of my story." I don't all volunteer at once.
Andrew.
All right, Andrew Horks.
I'll go. Without even realizing it, we were basically trying to implement what Texas Tech was doing. So no middle, keeping everything out to the wings, using Jody's concept of keeping them off the rooftop.
Okay.
Out of the middle into the corners. We were icing all pick and rolls. So that was leading into keeping them out the middle. And then we hadn't had a chance to run it yet. We'd worked on it the week before lockdown, but we were trying to force the post to spin baseline. And then we're going to double from the weak side, and then everyone fell in off that. One thing that I feel like I got wrong this year that I was in the process of fixing, but probably didn't have the athletes to pick up full court. I was going to look at implementing that in training, but in games. Our last game, we just played strictly half-court defense, and I really liked the way that was coming together. So I was going to look at sticking for that for the not too distant future. But I guess we'll see when we come into lockdown if we can put that in this year or not.
Cool.
But that was kind of our defensive philosophy.
Can you just explain to the group what keep them off the rooftop means? That's an interesting.
Yeah. So if you're thinking of like a rooftop, not a square one, but like a rectangular one. So at the top of the rooftop is the middle of the court. We're trying to keep them off the rooftop, slide them out to the corner, and then keeping them on the sideline so that they can't penetrate to the middle of the court.
Right.
Cool.
Do you feel like they got that? Like they understood that because like I love those metaphors. Like those are all. I think you told me that one before. Like I think coming up with like really kind of effective visuals are often a really cool way of making these kind of things work. Do you feel like they got that?
Yeah, the good old Zicoisms. They understood it in principle, but because they hadn't learned it from a previous coach and it was very different to what they'd done. Like last year, a lot of the boys were in Chris Etienne's team and they would just switch everything.
Yeah, right.
So they were still in the process of going from, okay, this is what I want to do, to actually being able to implement what it was that we were trying to get across to them.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's great. Cool. Who else want to share kind of what was your defense? Roger, thanks for joining. We're just sort of going around and kind of before Matt gets into his stuff, we're just asking kind of like, what was your defensive approach this year with your Harbor team, kind of in a nutshell, and then what was what would you kind of keep and what would you do differently?
Yeah, it's been an interesting year with my guys because I'm coaching at more of a development level.
Yeah.
And I thought they were probably a lot more advanced than they really were. So we're really having trouble just getting back and staying in front at the moment. And I think I tried to go a bit too far and to start with, thinking that they had some basic stuff. So I was trying to send people, keep them out of the paint. So the whole idea was keep people out of the paint, and if they are going to drive, send them baseline. Yeah. And then try and trap there. But that hasn't proved overly successful because we're not that great at playing defense just 101. So I sort of had to go right back to the basics. And I know New Zealand style of play is trying to jam all players, but we're just nowhere near that. So even just the concept of if a shot goes up, if you're below the free throw line, if we've got 3 guys there, you're going for a rebound. Yeah. The other 2 are getting back. We're even really struggling with that. So
How long do you think it took you to kind of like make that recognition? Like, how long did it take you to realize that they really were not ready for? Because I think it's important to note that kind of like these no middle kind of philosophies probably come after a very sort of an initial baseline like foundation of, can you just stay in front of your man, like as opposed to pushing them in a certain direction of the court, which I think is a kind of a broader strategy. Like, when did you realize that you needed to kind of almost take a step back and return to some foundation?
Probably our second game. Like, I thought our first game was just, okay, we just had a bad game. But then it just carried on. So it was pretty much halfway through the second game. Right.
Cool.
So, and these are young. They're quite a young age group, though, too. They're all bottom age.
What age group is this, Roger?
So they'll really be under 16s, I think, under the old.
Yeah.
So they're 17s, but development, but they'll all be 17s again next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
and Roger's in our second Div 17 under, which is a different kind of approach in the sense that it's, this year obviously we kind of did away with our C team and our bottom age A team and our TGIF kind of group, and we just kind of created this second tier of kids. And most of the bottom age kids who are like the stronger bottom age kids in that group will be first div next year. And you've got a few, I think, on your team who are definitely probably candidates to make it into a Div 1 team next year, but you also have a few kind of fairly like thin young boys who like basketball, but really kind of are
don't like defense. Certainly don't like defense.
Well, I would say, and I would just say that your team in particular had a couple guys who just didn't bring the intensity defensively. Like they're very passive defensively.
Yeah.
Important, Roger, because again, like I think if we think back about the template, like all of the sort of nuance and the specific details really have to come after that kind of broader, like philosophy of like, and I kind of almost call it like the spirit of play. Like, what's our spirit of play? Like, you're going to get some technical things wrong, but if we can really like lay down the spirit of play in terms of the pace, the intensity, the physicality, then we can start getting into the nuance. But if we don't have that, and I think Matt's kind of talk is really important there, because the simplicity of how we want to play is really, it's not crazy. It's not complex. It's just, play hard and try to stop your man,
Yeah. And just that, like you do a silly turnover or something and you just jog back. Yeah. And it's like, then so you sort of sub them off for a minute and go, what do you think I've subbed you off? Yeah. No idea. Like, no idea. Do you think you want to bust your ass and get back and not just rely on the one person back 4-on-1? Yeah. So it's really, really basic stuff, So.
And I guess but last comment for me would be then to say, well, really kind of with that team, starting from almost day one, it's almost like the defense is a way of really building culture within the team. Like building culture for a group of guys who like basketball but don't really play don't have the competitiveness, so
and there's a couple that go on that could make a B team next year, but the others are just going to be playing with my mate.
Cool. Thank you for that, Roger. Andrew or Gareth, you guys want to share maybe a little bit of your approach this year? And
I'll go. For me, with my team with 15 Cs, it was more trying to play like a pack style, fill the gaps, help off that low man, get back on defense. I guess to sum it up, I wanted to 1 against 5 basically the whole time. So we're not jamming, not doing anything like that. Like shot goes up, we get back. And just trying to teach them the real basics of defense, like how to close out properly, how to find your happy space, like what Matt was talking about last week, understanding who you are and who you're guarding. So keeping it real basic, just like don't necessarily force them one way, make them see the gaps so they're not getting easy driving, like no straight line drive, but we want to play defense as 5, not as 1 person, and get back in transition. Like no offensive rebounding. We're not big, we're tiny. Let's get back and play versus 5 and just try and work on our defense was the idea, because they're like in the end they're a team that needs development and needs learning. So for me, it was just teaching the basics of how to play 1-on-1, how to close out properly, how to stunt, how to be in the gap, yada yada, and things like that. But keeping it as simple as possible.
And if you could start the season over again, would you do anything differently, or were you pretty happy with your process and how it went?
I was pretty happy with our defense. The things I would change would be offensively. I think defense, I find teaching defense isn't teaching offense. So I think for me, I would do a whole lot of things differently on the offensive end.
Okay.
I think I went way too deep on offense when I should have kept it simple like I did on defense.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
No.
Yep. Cool. Good. Cool. Gareth?
Yeah, we were trying to change the style of play a lot for the female Harbour teams and really just full court, man-to-man for 40 minutes. And something that Jody and I had been talking about all off season. The main principle was go forward. So as soon as the ball isn't ours, we're going forward. We're not going backwards. It's just too much of that. Get back into the keyhole to play defense. So teaching them to go forward. And then the job of the person marking the ball was to contain, to push sideline and contain, always stay in front, and then allow one of your teammates to get into a position to help. So either sneak and steal. If the ball carrier is not looking at your eyes, then you can sneak around the back and try and steal the ball, or contain and plug. So you're basically, once they get to the sideline, you're rushing over to try and double team, and just trying to, so everything we'd done up to that point was just 2-on-2, trying to teach that concept of when you can go trap and learning how to do that process.
So giving them voice over trapping, like you're actually allowing them to make a decision defensively to go and trap if they feel like they are in a position to do it.
Yeah, and take risks in the backcourt. So until the ball gets over halfway, we're going, and we're because you've always got somebody on your back that can help out.
Cool.
If the ball goes past you, then you're just sprinting back and finding the leftover man. Cool. Once we got into the half court, then it was all about contain. So keep in front, either push outside the elbows or push below the backboard. But yeah, really aggressive until the ball gets over half court.
And what's the rationale? Like, I'm interested in the conversations that you guys had about what you said at the very beginning, which was go forward instead of go backward. Like, can you just sort of walk us through those conversations and why you landed on that philosophy? Because I think that's actually a really nice way of describing a philosophy. Like, go forward, be aggressive, push, and
same as my Carmel ideas is that you look at the team and the kids that we've got, and we've got skinny athletes that are super fit. We might have some height, but they don't have width in that height. And so we've got to be aggressive and stop teams being able to play bully ball against us. The number one team is Waikato, and what do? They get into the half court and then they just drive hard against you, create space and get their shots off. So we want to get our Waikato out of that by putting them into pressure before that.
You're acknowledging kind of the areas of vulnerability and trying to actively push back against it, right?
Yeah.
And you can force teams to turn the ball over without giving up layups. You're in a position, you start playing to some strengths.
Yeah, and Waikato, one of their, whilst they don't go deep, so they're normally playing 6 or 7 players mostly.
Yeah.
And they're not the fittest team, so we want to, by the fourth quarter, be putting teams under real pressure to make errors. So yeah, just really looking at what our strengths were and trying to play to those.
Cool. Yeah, cool. Very, very cool. Hey, Kane, thanks for joining. We're just basically ready to transition to Matt, but maybe if you want to have a go, what we're doing is just asking everybody to kind of maybe just share a little bit about your Harbor team this year, and like what did you guys do defensively, and be kind of give us the sort of big picture, and then some of the specifics, at least, is how far did you guys get into your system defensively, and if you could go back and start it over again, what would you keep and what would you do differently?
So start off, we had like a training camp with 7 of our 11 guys, and we mainly worked on full court defense, staying in front of our man. Usually just putting that principle in them with our pluggers, but I didn't really go too in depth on it. And then that was the main emphasis defensively, is we're not a big team, so we just need to be up in them in the full court and pressure them. And then we worked on a bit of screen defense from showing, hedging, mushing, and then as soon as the season started to roll by, I lost interest in teaching defense.
Okay.
And I just fell into I fell into like the thing where I've got multiple guys and I'm trying to still figure out who they are.
Yeah.
So mainly giving them all the freedom to play in our system on offense and trying to figure out what works for us. And then I figured it out within the last week of playing, and then I just realized our defense was shit against counties because they just blew by us every single time. And that's when I got more in depth with Matt in the chat in the first week of isolation. And what I would change definitely is probably emphasizing on how tough we are, especially in our small-sided games. And even though we're doing 3-3 and we're doing these quick back-to-back actions, it's like defense, I didn't really give them, I wasn't really accountable to them. I wasn't keeping them account to what they were doing. So that's kind of my fault in that part. But it's definitely toughness and just being up on our man, pressuring them, because we're not the biggest team. We just got to be quick and be up.
Yeah. You guys have a couple pretty good on-ball defenders who really apply pressure well in the backcourt. But I do agree that I think offensively you guys started to face some real challenges in being able to, get quality shots every possession against the stronger, more athletic teams. So I can see how that became an emphasis. Yeah. Cool. All right. Awesome. Well, hey, I think that's really, really good. I think that's a nice kind of framing, just kind of seeing where everyone is at defensively. So I think now with the remainder of our time, so Matt's got some slides prepared and has got, a nice kind of set of ideas around teaching points and building your defensive system kind of in the context of actually coaching, not just talking about like how you want to play. So I'll kind of turn it over to you, Matt, and we can sort of see where this goes.
Yeah, cool. Like Vince said, I do have a few slides that I put together. No super like crazy formats or videos or diagrams, unfortunately. I might build to something like that, but I'll just share my screen real quick and we can just go from there.
Yeah, cool.
Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Cool. So I was thinking, really just based off last week's conversation, I was just, thinking about a few of the core parts of what we do and what we teach and how we teach that align to the philosophy and therefore the system. And I just tried to pick a few things in particular, that might be interesting or might, I don't know, probably the 4 things or 5 things that made sense to me, maybe easiest to talk about. So I just want to go through a little bit around full court. So how we tend to start these concepts, I would say, is mostly what I'll go through today. It's more like the first or second drill that we will do when we're kind of trying to address each of these points. So yeah, definitely starting in the full court, then getting into a little bit more of half court containment stuff, ball screen coverages, and then playing.
Yeah.
So, I suppose just before I get into it, I definitely can, going through this myself, like I don't, to be honest, have any super creative or revolutionary ideas. I think all the drills are going to be super boring and things that you guys have probably seen before, but maybe a little bit more emphasis on how we go about it, maybe what we emphasize and how we potentially layer the concepts as something to take away or to look out for, I suppose. But I would say, we'll get into this first one here, full court. If you just look at the bolded stuff there, I really do, like, everything here is super simple. And I think that's, I was just kind of writing this down as you were talking, Roger, like, I think that's really good because you can apply it to any level. And I actually took that away from one of Guy Malloy's first coaches clinics he took was, everything that they do in the tall ferns is very simple. And everything he does with the tall ferns, they can do with under 12s. I think he said something like that. And I remember him saying that, and I thought, well, yeah, like there's no point in doing something crazy if the simple stuff works. So, for us in the full court, it really obviously just starts one-on-one. And, that first little column or first little bit there, one-on-one in the lane line. So we're working sideline to key line. And, it's really just an opportunity for us to really instill that on-ball pressure within a confined space to allow our defensive players to have an opportunity to work on what we want. And so, a key thing that we talk about initially is just make them turn. And it's about creating hard angles. And what I mean by that is really instead of just being square in front, as someone dribbles with their right hand, really getting hard around them to force them to change direction. And I think that, particularly with the younger ones, right, they kind of just shuffle sideways back and forth within the lane line. And that transfers all the way up to the higher level until you actually tell them, look, you need to make them turn. And all of a sudden it becomes a lot harder once you do that because there's more ground to make up on the other side of the change of direction dribble. So, that's a really easy and simple drill, but to make it really competitive, I think it's really important that you encourage physicality. We will rarely call fouls in all of our training, to be fair. We don't call many fouls at all, which I think Mitch Dance really liked. And it works. But it creates, I think, I like that, I like the competitiveness. I like guys getting a little bit upset with each other and kind of having a little bit of fire and seeing who will get pushed around and who won't. And so that obviously starts in our one-on-ones. We work in twos. And what I mean by that is if I'm dribbling with my right hand and I'm going to my right, if I'm on a full speed sprint, in order to cross over, most players, particularly at the junior level, have to slow down in some form. And so when we say work in twos, on the crossover dribble, if I get outside and create a hard angle and I make him turn, can I then do a great job of anticipating that and then getting another hard angle on the other side to make it a double crossover? And that's often, obviously, when you're talking about, we spoke last week about, potential turnovers and things like that. So we work in twos, and that's something that we say. And then I think another big one, around the junior level, year 9, 10, this type of drill is great for working on sliding. But I think, again, encouraging them to go full speed, that's where you got to talk about running versus sliding. And I think, if you are doing this drill at a good pace, then there'll be a lot more running than there is sliding. So we build that out from, one-on-one. Obviously, sorry, we often just start with just in the half court, and then we will move quite quickly to adding, live at halfway and different variations and whatnot. So that's obviously there. Moving into 2-on-2, we'll use a half width of the court. So we'll go split line to sideline. And this is where offensively, you can start with a baseline inbound, or you can just start on a check, whatever works. But offensively, outside of that first pass, if you do take it out of bounds, the ball can only be advanced on the dribble. And if you do want to pass only laterally or backwards. So we're working really same thing on the basketball, giving them a little bit more space, obviously, with a full width. But when I say understand where your plugger is, obviously there's someone on the basketball, and then we're asking the person off the basketball to be in a great plugging position. And this obviously all aligns to our full 5-on-5 defense. As soon as that pass gets inbounded, we should have pluggers behind the basketball. So yeah, that's definitely, when I say understand where your plugger is, if you get beaten sideline, that's a lot harder to recover from than if you say get beaten middle. So we're not putting that emphasis too much on things. We don't want to get beaten, but at the same time, if you're going to risk something, and if you want to go for a steal, then you should be going for a steal knowing that your plug is in your middle, and that's where you want to potentially let your man kind of go that way. In terms of our plugging position, we're pretty standard in terms of halfway between your own person, your own man without the basketball, and then obviously the guard with ball in hand. And we are just, one coach is talking to the guy on the ball, one coach is talking to the guy off the ball, and we're really emphasizing and demanding stance and talk. And that's where, often we'll be saying, this is where it's all about energy, it's all about effort, it's all about creating that culture and that emphasis that we want to kind of make that point guard from the opposite team think, oh crap, these guys are going to be in.
Hey, Matt, quick question. When you're going through, particularly in the full court type of scenario, like defensively, what would you say are the hardest things for players to really get well, do well, particularly at the beginning? Like, what are the biggest mistakes that players make when you're going through your initial building process of applying pressure in the backcourt?
I think the running versus sliding.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that kids don't understand. It takes them a little while to figure out how to run, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Particularly when you're trying to turn the basketball, they think defense is sliding, but really you got to sprint and you got to turn and then you got to sprint again, and you might get a couple slides at the end of your sprint, but then you're back in. A couple slides at the end of your sprint, but then you're back into sprinting again. So I would say that, because I think that if they don't get that right and it's not taught or it's not communicated, then the fallback is to just run back or to not apply as much pressure because they're not comfortable there and they're not seeing the reward. They're just getting beaten, or they're not feeling comfortable. So I would say that, yeah, for sure.
I particularly like the idea that, I know Kane and I have talked about this quite a bit. The idea that success defensively can be defined as making them change direction twice. Particularly on the ball in the backcourt. That if you can make a player change direction twice, A, you've slowed you've slowed transition. B, you haven't done what a lot of kids think success is, which is stealing the ball, particularly in the very young ages, which I think is one of the major transitions in terms of understanding defense for a young player. I'm not a good defender just because I've stolen the ball or blocked the shot. I'm a good defender because I haven't let them go by me and I've made them work really hard. And the payoff may not show itself in this obvious thing. It's going to show itself down the road in the game when they're more tired. It's going to show themselves in more sloppy turnovers when they lose the ball or whatever it may be, then taking time off the clock, that kind of thing. So,
I think the other thing about full court defense is that you can really utilize it, particularly for your bench players. I think that I've been really lucky to have, at Rosmini, we've had 4 potential starting rep players on our team at once. And so, part of their role has been to come in and apply pressure and to do these things that we're talking about here in a really consistent way. But then on the flip side, I think if you've got maybe a team of 12 and you know that there's a couple kids on there that aren't quite up to it, this stuff doesn't really take technique. I mean, a little bit, but you can really instill value and a feeling of success in players that are new or unskilled by just working hard, So I think that this allows for better use of potentially our bench players. And it's certainly something that adds an impact when they step on the floor. So just to round out this slide, guys, obviously one-on-one full width is a really tough drill. It's as it says there, you've got the full width of the court, you've got the full length of the court as well. And so this is where you probably need to match up your players in a pretty similar way in terms of their physical capabilities. But the aim here is just to turn the offense 6 times. And this is where you're really emphasizing the need to create hard angles, because if you don't create hard angles, then the offensive player can just keep dribbling in the same direction. And you'll see them start under the hoop at one end and then aim for the corner at the other end, and they'll just continue in a straight line. So this is a good one to really get them to understand angles. And also just if you want to be successful or even turn twice, you have to work your butt off to sprint in front. So it is a tough drill, but it is one that I think really almost forces our players to do the things that we're asking up here. And then, we're kind of getting into 2-on-2 full width, and this is where we're getting a little bit more game realistic and much easier to build out of in terms of building our full court concepts with 3, 4, 5 players. And this is where, because there's 2 offensive players, if you pressure the ball hard, obviously someone's probably just going to pass it because they don't want to deal with that pressure. And if you're in a plug position off the ball, you're not going to have immediate ball pressure because there's a clear distance between the reversal offensive player and the plug man. So this is where you can maybe more measure success by trying to slow the ball, by trying to time the advancement. Can we keep the offense from getting it over halfway within the first 6 seconds? And maybe this is where you want to emphasize the offensive players must take 3 dribbles so that it's just not a passing drill. But certainly working on, I like just getting to this point because 2-on-2 in the full court, take a few dribbles, reverse it, pressure that, take another few dribbles, defensive pressure, the next pass or the next kind of set of dribbles. But then there's a clear difference between our full court mentality and our half court mentality. And as we advance the ball over the halfway, it's just getting reps in terms of what are we doing in the full court, where there's a little bit more risk reward and there's a little bit more margin for error because we have pluggers and we have 3, 4, 5 guys, 2, 3, 4 guys behind the basketball. And then once the ball advances to over the half, we're really emphasizing the fact that you need to stay in front of the basketball. And so that mindset is very different, but it needs to be drilled and it needs to be clear. So, really easy to build out of that, getting kick aheads, getting guys in the middle of the floor so that they can't pass it ahead, building to 3s and 4s. And that's how we really just kind of layer our teaching. And that might take a few weeks. So cool. I realize that's a lot of talking. And again, like I said, super boring drills. Apologies, everybody, for those of you wanting a little bit more. But that's just kind of all I can say around what we do.
Anybody have questions about that piece?
Yeah, how do you manage the super boring drills over and over again in terms of, I don't know whether it's different boys and girls, but how do you manage them wanting to come practice?
I think the first thing is trying to make, all of these drills are drills, but you can also frame them in a way that they're games. So, adding it's live after halfway, it's live on the catch, potentially even going up and down with these types of drills. So I would say playing for sure. And I also think that you know, my experience is, and something that I think I've gotten a lot better at, is my ability as a coach to transfer energy. And that was one of the very first things that I took away as a coach, is particularly a head coach. I think you have to, at some point, you have to spark energy in the drill. And that's why, you know, if we've got 2 guys on the floor and they're working hard one-on-one, then they should be talking, but we've got 12 guys like screaming, clapping, energy, go. Like, it's just, I think when you provide that sort of environment and that culture, it's pretty fun to be around. And all of a sudden a one-on-one drill becomes like, oh crap, everyone's watching, I need to do a good job here. So yeah, I would say energy and effort and a positive environment. And I think that starts with the coach. And then, you know, certainly trying to make as many gains out of these type of core principles as possible.
Yeah.
Good question.
I personally don't view them as that boring personally. I actually think this is just, they're hard. Like I view them as pretty damn challenging. Like that, it's one of the hardest things to do is apply full court pressure and make them turn. That's really, really hard to do, because you not only, you got to understand angles and have good anticipation. You have to be fit.
Yeah.
But
like that one-on-one full width. I mean, guys are getting 2 reps and you need a drink break. I mean, that's a short drill.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that like any of these things is a game, you know, like, and any of these can go from defense to offense, kind of king of the court, you know, where you go, right. You know, if I make offense turn 6 times, then I become offense, you know, and then everybody likes playing offense. So, yeah.
Any other questions before I jump ahead? Cool. You know, just want to talk through a few things that I've really found to be important. You know, I'm not really going to go through basics around stance and closeouts and, you know, basic angles and hands and all that type of thing. But I would just like to mention a few things that I've kind of picked up on as really important over the last couple of years in particular. So the number one thing that I think that kids struggle with is they don't cover ground immediately because of their footwork. And so what a cheat step is, you know, we've all heard the whole big to bigger. But when there is a live situation in a game, live closeout, it's actually really hard to gain the ability to close out and then your first step to go bigger. I mean, most kids are going here first if they're moving this way. And so we drill that a lot, and we really emphasize gaining ground, gaining coverage in our very first movement. And I think that that's something that gets overlooked a lot, and we've got really poor habits, and there's a reason why we get beaten. And I think that that's a big part of it, is that we don't, our footwork is poor off the closeout or even just off the check. Secondly, our first movement, often because we're slow or because we're not sharp, our first slide, we open the gate far too much. And we don't slide laterally. We really let the offensive player get on our hip, and all of a sudden our chest was facing the halfway. If we're guarding it, you know, right on the split line at the 3-point line, all of a sudden we went from guarding it square to chest to sideline. So that takes repetition. And then I suppose the next one, and this is where, you know, we've found our guys become, as we rep this, our guys become pretty good at keeping it up front. They become pretty good with their footwork. But at some point, that's no longer good enough. So there needs to be physicality, and there needs to be chest contact early before you get into the key. because guys can still, I mean, you look at someone like Harry Payne from Rangi, he will take chest contact all day, because if he can get into the key and rise and elevate, he's still hitting that thing 7-8 times out of 10. So once this is again more of a layering thing, but once our guys are comfortable with keeping it in front, now it's taking that a step further and demanding early chest contact and getting to our point last week, showing our hands. Because as soon as there's that kind of that hand check or that hand on the hip, it's a foul. And those are the types of fouls that we want to call in practice. If it's physical and kind of guys are going at each other, let that go. But just poor technique is what we want to pull up. So I suppose, how do we drill this? We have a lot of this year we've just had guys in a line, and they'll be going kind of like foot fire, and then just to simulate a closeout, almost that kind of choppy feet stuff, blow the whistle, and they've got to make a cheat step immediately. So they've got to gain coverage, and then they've got to gain as much coverage as possible. Then, you can transition that into full closeouts and cheat steps. So a lot of 1-on-0 footwork, and just to warm up. And if you get, again, vocal and loud and have some competitions between teams on who can be the loudest, you're kind of trying to make that stuff fun. And then we layer that with controlled live situations. So where, maybe there's just two guys on, a guy on each wing offensively with a basketball, we close that out. They might be able to go immediately, or we might have, say, again, kind of defensive mirroring of the basketball. On the whistle, we allow them to take 2 dribbles. And again, keeping that thing in front and really focusing on that footwork. So, some variety in terms of not going from 1-on-0 to 1-on-1, I think particularly at the younger age group is important. If we've got rep guys that are experienced and good at it, we might just transition straight to 1-on-1, but we also want to give them opportunity to apply the teaching in a not so kind of risky format, I suppose. And then we do play a lot of 1-on-1, and I suppose for me, I really like to challenge our guys at the Prem level and set really, really high expectations. And, I think it's probably age dependent and skill dependent on how much you want to challenge them and what is the right amount, because you don't want it to go into, to turn it into embarrassment and then, a feeling of, oh, I'm just not good enough. I'm never going to be good enough. So I think as coaches, we kind of got to gauge that. But certainly when I'm taking a group that I know is able to, we will have 1 hoop going, and there will be 2 guys on the floor, and there will be 10 guys watching. And we all know by the end of that who can guard it and who can't. Most times everybody can, but the most important thing is that you see everybody working as hard as possible. And then as soon as you bring that huddle in, you say, do you normally guard the ball like that? Everybody says no. And then there's a clear expectation on the kind of room for improvement that is needed. So again, do you want to go kind of like 4 stations to lots of, kind of one side go at a time and just like rep it out like that? Or do you want to go really isolated and just have 1 hoop with a lot of people watching? Obviously, there's a variety of ways in which we do things with various levels. And then also the difficulty level. So obviously a full closeout starting under the rim to an offensive guy waiting on the catch is very different to a check, right? So do we want to go full closeout? Do we want to kind of go kind of a pitch with 1 step closeout, or do we just want a stationary check? And then offensively, number of dribbles, etc. How much safety net do we want to give the defense? And we'll gauge that as we go in terms of building that up. And then my last point there, I think the reason that we go, for example, like the 1 hoop with everybody watching, I think that defense, kind of to your point, Roger, like some guys just don't have the fight and desire that we need. You know what I mean? Like sometimes we need to figure out a way to light that for them.
Mhm.
Because there's a whole bunch of kids that have the skill and have the technique and are able to do things, but they just don't really want to, or they're not forced to, or they don't know that they're going to be held accountable. And so I suppose as we go through this, it's about gauging at what point do I feel like I've taught it and they know what to do and how to do it. And then it's about, again, do they have the desire? Do they have the fight? How do we measure that? How do we keep them accountable? Because I think a lot of defense is just really about keep it in front and work your ass off, and you're probably going to get it done.
It's interesting, Matt. I would just jump in really quickly because I think that, like, if you were to kind of think pedagogically, just like about like kind of like good teaching and learning, most people would say, well, you don't want to have like a whole bunch of people standing while only 2 people are doing it. However, there are moments where doing that is exactly the right thing, particularly when you sort of like, when you know that playing in front of your peers and having everybody looking at you.
Yeah.
And if you can get everyone engaged, like cheering you on to try to like,
Yeah.
you know, that can also kind of take someone to that next stage where it's like, I'm not very confident in this, but I've got my entire team watching me guard the ball and they're all cheering me to get this right. And I can try to figure out, you know, like that kind of can will me almost to that next level. And so it sets a clear expectation over with the kind of defense you need to play, but also creates an opportunity for someone to feel supported and to kind of meet the expectation.
Yeah.
And you don't need to do that all the time. You maybe do that, you know, early in the season at the first or second training when you're really doing a defensive day. And then you maybe come back to that if you feel like that level wears off. But I feel like that's that can be a really, really powerful tool as a coach.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Vince, because I would say we do this once a season, maybe twice. And I think last week where I said, you know, we made some really big change. I think we spoke about this last week. After we lost to Rangi in our first championship year run, I mean, that's the next train. I just felt like defensively we were just average. You know, we were kind of just there, but not there. You know what I mean? And I think all of those guys understood and had the skill. That a lot of them are New Zealand players. A lot of them have been playing for a long time, but we just didn't have the fight and desire required. So the very next training, that's what we did. And I felt like from that moment on, we were a completely different team. And everybody had a clear expectation of what is required out of me, but also what is required out of the people next to me. And you're right, it needs to be a positive environment, and we are loud and we are energetic and we are, you know, we're all for each other succeeding.
There's nothing better than just like having everybody get hyped for you when you play.
100%.
I mean, like there's like nothing better than that as a player, you know, because that's how you.
And you play better too, right? You're like, oh damn, like I'm feeling it. I'm energized. So yeah, 100%. So, you know, again, we'll build that to 2-on-2 with no help, and you know, we'll have a few rules like catch. You know, you must catch outside the 3, or even sometimes offensive guys can't cross the split line. So really, it is still 1-on-1, and it's contain the ball, and your teammate isn't helping you, but it's adding that whole off-ball positioning. Ball gets skipped, we close out, so we're adding that kind of extra layer, but not moving immediately to kind of like pack and help, and because it still is very much a 1-on-1 drill, and you can ease those constraints as we feel like the accountability on the ball is building. So those are just a few things that I thought were kind of that came to the forefront of my mind when I was thinking about how we teach 1-on-1 and what's really important, what I've seen. Because I do take the Year 9 and 10 Academy at Rosmini for the last 3 years maybe, and these are the things that I'm working with them on. I'm working on cheat steps. I'm working on sliding. I'm working on 1-on-1 lane lines. I'm thinking about these things so that when they get to my Prem team, there's an expectation there that they know those type of things. Maybe not the kind of like everyone watching each other. That's maybe not what I'm doing when they're 12 and 13, but there's a lot of other things there. So any questions on that before I again jump ahead?
Matt, do you ever use the stay and go? You know, I know you're a big fan on you got to contain, but you know, in reality, you do get beaten at times. Do you ever use that stay and go drill?
I don't know that drill specifically. Are you more meaning like someone steps up and so they stay on the ball and
yeah, so
the
the person's coming in from whatever, you know, the weak side of the and telling the other guy, you know,
right.
you're okay, stay with him.
Yeah.
And then if he's beat, so you sort of start shoulder to shoulder outside the 3-point line, and the defense starts with the ball, and they've got to hand it to the, and then the guy controls it, says, okay, you've got to go, meaning you've got to go and get my man if I'm going to step up.
Yeah.
So that could be
no, we definitely do, and those are some of the things that I suppose it sounds like we're like very black and white, you know, like this is all we do, but there are certainly drills where there is decision making. We require our defenders to make decisions. And, you know, we do that. We do do it. We don't do a lot of it. And I think because the way that we drill things like our coverages, which I'll get into next, and our traps and stuff, like a lot of that is a whole lot of running on and kind of tagging people and getting back and playing in gaps. And there's certainly a little bit of like isolated decision-making drills that we do. But then I feel like when we play a lot, guys are making decisions all the time.
Right.
So yeah, a little bit of both, I would say. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. So in terms of just a little bit around ball screen coverages, you know, I've just kind of set up the drill first, which is actually down the bottom, but we'll kind of have two guys in the seams. So like free throw lines, key line extended up to the top. So seam, slot, whatever you call that. And then two guys on the wing. So we'll have 4 out. And we'll just, in any type of coverage that we've got, wing on balls, I should say, any type of wing on ball coverages that we've got, this is the type of way that we teach it. And this is something that, you know, Mike Fitchett came into our practice a few years ago and he taught it like this. And I was like, that's simple and super effective. And that's what we're going to do. We'll go dummy live. So what I mean by that is ball in the seam, pass it to the wing, on ball coverage is initiated. That's not a live setting. It's a dummy kind of, you know, half speed, get the feel, get the movement, get the kind of ticking off each box, swing it, dummy on the second side. 2 more guys are going through that. And then the third side, we're back and we're live out of that. So that's how we set it up in terms of how we actually drill. And I mentioned last week, you know, I'm all about 3 cues. So 3 specific things for each player on the floor. And so, you know, I'll just take you through the hard show right now. And this is something that we go through a lot. And then it's just about drill. So obviously the defender guarding the basketball, his first thing once he hears the screen is coming, he's got to lock off. Then as that screen is initiated, and the guard starts to dribble and use the screen, then we're talking about not getting hit. And to do that, you know, we got to get skinny through the screen. And what I mean by that is as we pass the screener, as we get over the top of the screener, we want to be sideways and stretched through, as opposed to obviously trying to go 2 shoulders through the screen. And then we're over the screener, and then we're underneath the shoulder. So those are 3 cues that they know every single time that they have to execute if they're guarding the ball in a hard show coverage. And there's obviously small intricacies that we'll add, but in general, if I think that guys feel pretty comfortable that they can go bang, 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 move on. And then obviously on the flip side, if you're a screener, you gotta be a great communicator, and that is what starts the 3 cues for the person defending the basketball. You got to communicate, and that starts everything else. And we often talk about being effective with our wording or our phrasing. So screen coming left, hard show is long and it's going to take too long. So we'll say, you know, show left, mush left, shark, you know, that's our double team stuff. So whatever it is, we just really want to be short and sharp with it. And we often actually talk about being above the noise. So you know, we're big on talking. So if everyone's saying, you know, help left, or kind of, I got room here, left, right. If we've got 4 guys on the floor, 5 guys on the floor saying that with a crowd at an Event Finder Stadium, 1,000 people, whatever it is, you know, the guy that's defending the screener, he's got to get above the noise. And so his communication has to be loud. So we talk about that. So once he's there, obviously once the screen is set, his chest is to sideline. And that's massive. You know, angles are huge in terms of executing the show. As soon as you open up and your chest is more towards the halfway line, all of a sudden it's not a hard show, it's a flat show. Yeah. And that guard has a lot more room and a lot more court to play with, which is what we need to stay away from. And that's something that, you know, I'm struggling with my year 11s and 12s before lockdown, because they understand, but just their ability to execute that in a full speed, full live setting, it's hard. It's really hard to do, but we got to drill that. And then it's 2 slides, you know, 2 slides, bang, get out of there, force that guy to halfway. Timing of those 2 slides are important in terms of not allowing the split. But yeah, just getting really aggressive with our hands and stuff to just make the offensive guard think about him and not think about passing and picking us apart. Only other thing on that I wanted to share, you know, is obviously when we go dummy live, that's cool, but it's not super transferable because it's pretty slow. So sometimes we'll just have a point guard at the top, you know, just a couple feet off the 3-point line. We'll have 2 wings, and then we'll have a big under the rim. Point guard initiates either side, maybe fills the weak side corner, strong side corner if you want to work on different spacings in terms of people off the basketball. But we'll have a wing on ball with a pass entry from the top, and then that big under the rim will sprint into the screen, and that's where we're adding more of that realistic sprint screen where the big has to follow him and get out and show.
And it'd be the same screener on every dummy one? It'd be the same screener? Or will it be?
No, that if you go dummy live,
yeah,
that'll be the rotation will allow it to be different people. And you could go dummy live. It's really up to you to get through everybody if you wanted to do that. But just a few varieties of 4-on-4, just to work on different things. You know, if you start in the middle, then maybe you can even go middle coverages if you wanted to work on middle out of that setup. That's kind of what we do there.
Cool.
And then I suppose, you know, linking to kind of the response I had before, you know, I know that there's a lot of obviously small side games, and again, sorry, but I don't have any creative ones for you. We just kind of play a lot. And so I suppose the things that we do, though, we play a lot in 4-on-4. And we don't often play 5-on-5 in practice, particularly from a defensive perspective. I mean, we will scrimmage to get through our sets and to get through offensively, you know, different roles on the floor for sure. So we will play a lot of 5-on-5, but when we're trying to emphasize defense, 90% of the time, if we want to play, it'll be 4-on-4. And the reason for that is because there's less space to hide, right? So you're involved a lot more. Secondly, you know, there's a lot more space for the offense. So all of a sudden, when there's 10 guys in the half court going to 8, there's a little bit more room to turn a corner or to get past a hip or to exploit the defense, and that is a bigger challenge for us defensively, and that's what we try and do. And then, you know, I often think that if we can execute our coverages in a 4-on-4 setting, it's going to be a lot easier when you add a 5th guy, and a 5th guy can rotate or catch or plug that hole. So we spend a lot of time playing 4-on-4, and that really, I think it does help us. Cool. So, you know, just a variety of games in the half court, you know, and again, how we layer this thing. So early on in the season, it'll be, you know, you got to get 3 teams of 4-on-4 or 2 teams of 4-on-4. You know, you got to get 3 stops before you're out. Then we'll go 3 stops in a row. Then we'll add the cardio of playing back to back possessions. You know, you got to sprint halfway, get back, and the ball is in. Next team, maybe we'll even go. I mean, we've done 3-quarter court guys aren't happy with us those days. But, you know, that's some other stuff that we'll do. And then there's, in terms of layering it, what are your expectations in terms of execution? To start with, a lot of the time, we're just after full energy and full effort and just guys going crazy, you know, and then if they mess up, we'll kind of live with it. But before nationals, it is you better execute from the match point, or, you know, our talk to initiate the offense, the defense, you know, to coverages on dribble handoffs and hard shows, and if there's an off-ball screen and you know, shot goes up, hit box out, go get it. Like, it's da-da-da-da-da-da. And if you mess up, then score is reset and we'll keep going. So again, gauging what part of the season you are and where you are with your teaching and what your expectations can be. You know, that's kind of where we at least gauge what we want out of them. Then, you know, again, full court 4-on-4, we play a lot of that. Is it out of a transition setting? You know, do you want to basic 4-on-4 drills in terms of, you know, opposite guy touches the baseline and it's we're getting going out of that? Or a lot of the time we'll just play half full. So we'll go 3 positions where it's a check. We'll go a half court position, transition into a full court position, and then another full position, and we'll finish up there and rotate teams. 3-5-7 positions, you know, we'll start again early in the season. We're not playing more than 3 positions in a row because I'd rather quality than quantity. We'll add 2 more to 5, then we'll go 7. And then if we want a scrimmage, we might go a time scrimmage, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is. And so I suppose, again, I don't have, like I said, no creative small-sided games for you guys, unfortunately, but we do adjust our rules depending on what we're working on. Cool. And obviously, I'm sure everyone here does that as well. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had. I don't know if I've taken up too much time, if you guys are half asleep, but
no, you're good.
Happy to, Vince, go from there, answer questions, or just chuck it to the group, whatever suits. I'll stop sharing as well.
No, I think you're good. Yeah, I'm curious, like, how, one of the questions that I'm really interested in is, like, you play a lot, right? And I actually I really appreciate kind of your comment around, like, I don't have any really creative drills. We just play a lot. And there's actually something quite profound in that, because I think at the end of the day, like, you don't need to necessarily have the most amazing things. You just need what's effective. But you clearly believe in learning through playing.
Sure.
And and I think that's an important teaching tip. One of the questions I would ask is, in letting them play a lot, how do you decide when to stop play and correct an error versus letting them play through it? Because there's an important point of distinction in the role of the coach and asking yourself, you know, I can keep stopping it.
Yeah.
And to correct, but then I can, in doing that, lose the flow of even the training.
Yeah.
So what's your kind of, like, walk us through kind of your thinking around when would you stop something versus when would you let them play through a mistake?
Yeah. So I think I really don't like to play when it starts to feel like pickup.
Yeah.
And so I will stop a practice and we'll finish an hour early if I feel like effort and intensity is dropping. Luckily, I haven't had to do that too often, but, you know, we'll certainly stop and reset. So I think I just, you know, it's kind of like the whole idea around shooting, right? If you're going to shoot half speed, then what's the point of doing it? So that's definitely something that we try and hold to a high standard.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think something that me and Sonny have learned a lot more of, and we're getting better, but we're not great at it, is that you have to really pick your moments, and you have to have a clear understanding on what are you trying to get better at today.
Yeah.
And so I think having a clear priority on, okay, today we are learning and we are teaching, and then we are going to measure our dribble handoff defense.
Yeah.
And so we'll make the game, we'll make rules like you have to have a handoff before you can score to ensure that we're getting through reps when we play.
Yeah.
But then refraining from, you know, a whole bunch of other things that can go wrong in a position, and just really allowing them to play through that. But if there's something that they mess up within the handoff, on it, boom, stop, talk through, got it.
Yeah.
And I think, just as a secondary point to that, is I think as coaches, we can all gauge the players that are struggling with just the information that we're giving them.
Yeah.
Versus the players that have got it immediately, don't even need to probably practice it. They just know what to do and they're ahead of the game. And often it's those players that play a lot more or play at a higher level. And so that's where I think, you know, we can sub players out, or we can have a quiet word, or we can really coach the individual a lot better. And I think that's something that I've tried to do better, which I'm not great at yet. But again, being able to be individualized as well as being team oriented. It's hard to do as a head coach, particularly when you don't have any assistants, because you're thinking big picture and you're thinking team wide. But definitely trying to challenge and add bits and pieces and provoke some thinking in players that can handle it.
Cool. Yeah, really cool. I like that. Open to you guys. Would love to hear some thoughts, some questions, reactions. Doesn't have to be. There's no right or wrong here. Please share.
When you're talking about training defense, how much do you put on training offense at the same time, or do you just
Great question.
leave that out completely?
Yeah, good question.
Great question.
I was just thinking, like, for my Harbour team this year, you know, when Vince asked everyone at the start to go through what they did on defense, I wouldn't have had much to say because we haven't really done much on defense for my Harbour team. And that's because I had some offensive stuff that I really wanted to try out. And we spent the whole first, I don't know what that was, 6 weeks maybe, just really focused on offense, which doesn't sit super well with me because to Andrew's point, I find it a lot easier to coach defense because I've had a very clear kind of feel on what I want from my teams. But in terms of Rosmini, every year out of the 4 years I've taken the Prem so far, we've spent the first probably easy 6 weeks, 7 weeks just on defense. And I've even done that with rep teams, and we will have games and we'll have competition without having any offense in. And again, to me, I'm completely comfortable with that because I know that come October, I personally believe that defense is what's going to win us the championship. And so I'm more than happy to share the ball, move it, don't stand still, don't really care what you guys do down there, just play unselfishly, defensively. These are our rules and this is our expectation. This is what we're going to do. So I would say for me personally, and this is just a personal preference, I really focus on the defensive end to start because I think it also really helps with building a culture of a team and setting clear expectations. I think that that's really beneficial to do early in the season. And I'm more than happy to dedicate my first big chunk of time, obviously dependent on the season with reps in school's a lot longer, to that.
But within a drill, like if you're teaching a defensive drill and you see something horrible offensive going on, or are you pulling that up, or is it just I'm only focused on the defense?
Yeah, like within reason. I mean, like a lot, I'm just thinking, we might be teaching a dribble handoff and then all of a sudden someone's dribbling with their inside hand right next to the defender, right? Like that happens. I mean, that happens all the bloody time. I'm just like, yeah, you can't do that. Dribble with your right hand or outside hand, whatever it is. So for sure, 100%. I think if it's easy and it's clear and you know that you're not going to kind of end up down a rabbit hole trying to explain something, I think about that a lot with teaching zone offense. Like there's a million, but if they do this, or if that person's there, or if like this is you spend 30 minutes trying to explain something that we probably don't need to because that situation is never going to happen. So if I can quickly address it, or if it's super important, or if it's super blatant, then yes. But again, being clear on what we're trying to get better at today is important to me because I find myself getting off track quite easily. Especially with some of these dudes.
How do you balance, Matt? You wear two hats, obviously school and rep stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get that horrible thing that they've just been thrashed at school or whatever.
Yeah.
Turn up to you absolutely dead beat.
Mm.
How do you manage that sort of?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it is hard. It's really hard. I mean, I remember the first year that I coached under 19, the first year that I coached for Harbour, and all of a sudden I was coaching every night of the week, and I just thought, fucking hell, this is terrible. This is hard work, man. But I also have, because of the age group I coach, I have guys in both teams, and I think what I find challenging is keeping them engaged, because as you guys can already tell, I'm very monotone. So like, it's very hard to keep my guys engaged and to keep them wanting to be there, not to mention the whole workload side of things and the load management. But I think what I found this year, which is actually, I would love to say that I thought that through, but it's kind of just worked out naturally, is because offensively, we've been emphasizing things with my Harbour team. And then defensively at Rosmini, we've been emphasizing that there's been a nice contrast, I suppose. And I think that that's really important, because you're automatically talking about different things. You're thinking about different things. And just, I don't know if this really answers your question, but what I found is, at Rosmini, we kind of just started to getting into the offensive side of things, and it just happens that our offense is very ball screen orientated. So I felt like defensively, with our understanding of the rotations against different coverages, all of a sudden our offensive ability to execute against that was far superior, because we had the defensive understanding. So I think that was a little tangent, because I actually forgot what your question was, but yeah.
Coaching kids who come from school training in the rep space. So it's kind of the load management question, which I think is a really important one, because we do have this challenge of kids coming to us after having just had a training for their school team, and this is just more on the rep side, but it goes vice versa, right? I mean, come to a school training after having done a big tournament over the weekend or what have you.
Yeah, I think it's just a constant battle that we have to try and manage. I personally remember as a player, I mentioned last week that the 1 year that I felt as a player that I had the most gains was the year that I moved to Coast and played for Steve Doan. I would say 90% of our practices were the most boring practices that I've ever been to. And we didn't do much. We walked through offense, we walked through defense. But when it was go time, the expectation was so fierce and the demands were so high that we just played like crazy. So I think, to answer your question, I think that you don't have to necessarily coach hard and coach, get up and down and have a really lively practice 24/7. I think as long as you can effectively convey the message and manage the workloads, but also to the point earlier, like I would much rather go short and sharp for 20 minutes in terms of effort and intensity, and then get some light shots up for the other hour, than have an hour of averageness, which I don't think helps the body either. So I think, again, it's just a quality versus quantity question.
Yeah, cool. I'd agree with that. Who else has a question? Andrew Works.
Ask a question.
I'm kind of piggybacking on Roger's question. Is there ever a time where you'll reach out to their school coach and just kind of get a better understanding about that player from the school space and what kind of defensive philosophies or offensive philosophies they might do, so you can kind of adjust how you teach that player?
Good question. Luckily, I am the school coach for most of my guys. But for the rep guys that I haven't coached at school, I haven't actually reached out to the coach in terms of like, hey, what are you guys, how do you go about teaching this kid, or, you know, why does he do this, or trying to get a deeper insight into the player. I will often ask the players from say a Westlake or Rangi when they come to my rep practice, hey, what's your week been like, or when, you know, particularly if they've practiced that day, because I know their schedule. We'll have that kind of conversation just with the player. I personally don't feel like it is my place to go to the coach and try and manage workloads within reason. I think if someone was like super burnt out and you could just tell that he was run ragged, then maybe I would consider that. But I would say that I run my guys probably as hard as the next school coach, so I probably am not in a position to conversate on that. But yeah, I don't know. I guess if I needed to find something out from a school coach, I don't know. I think I would be open to it, but I think I'd also just try and get to know the person. I'd try and get to know the player. I'd try and ask them. And if that was not, if I couldn't get an insight from those conversations with the player, then yeah, I think I would reach out if I needed to, but I haven't as yet.
Yeah. Good. Kane, Andrew, questions? You guys good? Okay. I would be very interested in kind of the time that we have left, just hearing from you guys a little bit around just some takeaways. Like, what have been some maybe, you know, 1 to 3 takeaways from, you know, this kind of the chance that we've had to ask Matt questions. We posted lots of content to the event. We've had some videos. What's your thinking now just about the defensive side of the game? What are 1 or 2 things that you know, really kind of latched on from what Matt's talked about or from what we've discussed? Love to hear from everybody. Kane, maybe you could start.
I've already had chats with Matt before this and kind of already understood half the stuff he's talked about, but I think for me it's more emphasizing on actions rather than overcomplicating stuff. Like for me, like if I'm teaching defense, I tend to teach like 3 defensive screen coverages, or I tend to go overcomplicate. Okay, help side, not really going intent on, okay, what's happening on the ball? Are we staying in front?
Yeah.
Because that's mainly what happens with our boys, is like we have Tom and Rocco's very erratic, and he's all over the show at this moment. But like we have guys who are erratic but are athletes, and trying to figure out what emphasis should I have on them at that training. Yeah. And kind of what Matt just said before, what are you trying to get better at this training? Yeah. That's kind of what I've taken away over this sort of isolation period. It's cool. Kind of like, what are you figuring out?
Cool. That's good. Cool. Andrew, Wakai, what about you? Takeaways from defensive conversations?
The biggest takeaway, I guess, for me is what you said, Matt, about understanding each player and coaching the individual more. Like, it is hard, especially with my Harvard team and at Hubsville Point. I don't have an assistant coach. Or I do have an assistant at Hubsville Point, but he's my ex-player, and you know he's there because he loves the school, not so much because he wants to coach in the future. So it's like, but that's one thing I need to do more of, is understanding who I'm coaching, how they learn, what motivates them. Like I try to always talk to them, like you say, Matt, and figure out their schedule and what they have on. Because I know a lot of them they play a lot of school basketball, whether it's a lot of them playing junior prems or some 17s team or trying to make prems or whatever. So trying to understand their schedule as well. But I like exactly what Kane just said, like, what are we working on today? I like that point. It's a really good point. Like, I think I have that problem where I'll overcoach things I don't need to. So I'll just pick up one of these little things, or so I should just shut up and we're working on defense, or they did something really minor wrong and whatever. We're not worrying about that today. We're worrying about this on defense or this on offense. So I like that. What else did I write down? Other thing I liked before is how you said double points for perfect execution. I like that. I really like that. Like instead of rewarding players, especially on, it's hard to think of like point systems for defense. Like it's very easy on offense, like a layup is worth 3 points, yada, yada, that's easy. But defense, I really like that. So if they get that hard show right, regardless of what happens, et cetera, but if they get it perfectly executed, they get double points on defense. And so for me, we're doing more point system stuff on defense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Those are my 2 big takeaways, though, for sure.
If I can just respond to that comment around like coaching the individual, I would just say like that for me has been a really, I think again as a head coach of a team, so hard because you're thinking big picture, and I really value trying to build a relationship with my players, and I really take pride in that. And I think there's so many times throughout it, particularly throughout a long season, you get to that mid-season point where it just feels like you're showing up to practice a lot of the time, repetitive.
Yeah.
And I will find myself just being like, damn, I haven't like literally spoken to this dude one-on-one in like weeks or months. And I would say the second thing, and I don't know if I've been thinking about this, I don't know if I've actually said it last time, but I think as a coach, I found, and as a player in particular, was with a certain coach, double points if you get to pick him nationally, is I think we love to like feel like we're coaching and to feel like we're imparting knowledge. And often that means that we coached the 10 and 11, 12 guy with all the knowledge in the world just because he's never learned it before. And we forget about first, second, third that knows everything that we've gone through, but we need to find new and creative ways to challenge them on an individual level. And so I often find myself thinking like, why do I keep talking to that dude? I mean, like, that's not to say that he doesn't need it, but you can very easily find yourself without even realize coaching 1 or 2 or 3 guys without paying any attention to your better players.
I can see that. That's a really good point.
And I like what the Guy Malloy clinic a few days ago, and he talked about like starting at A. Like a lot of times, like you're saying, with the top guys, we can start at level D because they know ABC, or it's like, especially with it is hard being a head coach. Like I know with my guys who are sort of the more bench players, coaching them and starting them at A and not starting them at D and assuming that they know everything that like the Davids and whatnot and the Max know from playing last year in A's, if that makes sense as well. Just building on that,
Really good. Gareth, you guys seem to be on an interesting path with your coaching. What's your thinking now, after having gone through these, a few chats and spending a bit more time thinking about defense?
Yeah, I guess this year especially is more about really understanding what my framework and what my systems are. I mean, I had some ideas, but when I first started, I had Taylor and nobody else that could play. Going through to last year and then this year taking a Harbour A team myself for the first time. I mean, I assisted Dylan last year, but I felt we spent 95% of our time on offense, which was completely different to my philosophy. So, this has really been good about really defining what I want to do as my philosophy is on defense and having teams that are in a position that can and move forward with that.
Yeah, cool.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Roger, what do you think when you're thinking? Takeaways?
Thinking too much. I just think that repetitive small drill stuff will work pretty well for me, especially when you that day you turn up and you've got 7 players or something at a training, So, but also, just that repetitive stuff because sometimes I sort of worry a little bit about that as well. But making it games and the scoring to creative scoring, probably the uptake for me. And maybe we can have a session running some of these drills just get a team in there and so that we can see live in action as well.
Yeah, be a lot easier.
Which would be great because I can't wait to get out of this friggin' lockdown.
Roger, I would say that, I definitely think this year has been interesting. We gave you definitely a different challenge this year with the team. But, when you really think about what Matt's been talking about, you've been talking about lots of 2-on-2, 1-on-1, type games. And, if you got 7 guys, you can play a ton of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, guys like playing 5-on-5, and you know how it is. Guys want to play 5-on-5, 4-on-4, but I kind of believe that kids like playing basketball, and they like playing basketball, and I thankfully for us, you learn best through playing, but in a semi-structured way that doesn't descend into sloppiness, like Matt kind of was pointing out. And I think if you can kind of try to maintain a standard of like the quality of play while allowing enough freedom in the context of training and games that they can kind of make decisions while still adhering to the basic rules, I think you can always have a really good session. You can always have a really, really good session, and you can build and teach through that. So, I think it'll be interesting. I've got a lot of thoughts as well about different ways to come up with games for defensive focus. Andrew, what do you think? What's your thinking?
I think the biggest takeaway from this has been the cues. I think assisted Matt before, so I kind of got a good idea of kind of what he's about and how he teaches things. But I mean, it's kind of learning that next level of how to reinforce what you're teaching, so that kids, you have to continually go over the same things. It's just 3 quick words, and then they're back on track with what they're doing as well. The repetition, as Roger said. I remember my first couple of years, I was always trying to rack my brain, trying to think of different drills every single time so that the training wouldn't be boring. They'd be like, well, this is something exciting every single time, but sometimes there's value in just going over things and tweaking the rules a little bit, but not having to change the actual what you're trying to do.
Yeah, really good. I'll just kind of finish with a couple of things that I've got. One being, I think the biggest takeaway from Matt is the importance of having a map for your team. And I use the word map to kind of in place of the word template. But you've got to have a map to work from, and that map gives you some guideposts, a destination in terms of what we want basketball to look like. And, if you don't have a map, you're going to have a hard time knowing how to respond to situations. So you really need that map to guide you. I think because I kind of think at the scale of the whole region, I'm always looking for what I call leverage points. And leverage points are like small things that have big effects. So what's something that is really, really small, feels almost insignificant, but if we did it really, 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 really well consistently across the board, it would dramatically change. And I would argue that the thing that if we could figure out how to do really, really, really well, every single team, it would be not opening the gate. I think, like Matt's comments about, guarding and not guarding and being able to slide laterally and take contact to the chest. That one action, I think, is responsible for, I would say, 75% of the drives. And I'm just throwing that number out of nowhere, like it's not scientific. But I would argue that if we could get every kid in our region to really be good at sliding, taking away the initial, that downhill trajectory of the offensive player, make them fan out and take contact to the chest, I think that solves an inordinate number of problems that happen for us. Because over and over and over and over again, I see the same thing, which is someone drives and we just open up and let them get into the paint. And now you've forced help, and now you've let them get, downhill to the rim, and it just creates so many problems. So it's not just saying contain, it's actually saying in the initial first step of the offensive player, you need to be willing to step over and take contact to the chest. And I think that that's where one of the things I'd be very interested to see is if we could take more charges. Because if you do that well, you're taking more charges. ask yourself a question: how many charges has your team taken this year? And I would say that in the U.S., it is normal to take charges. Here, it's not normal. It's rare to see someone genuinely take a charge. And so that's what I'm always looking for. It's like, what's the leverage point that can take us? And that's the thing that I'll be focusing on, I think, when we return to the court from a defensive perspective, is that and making the offense change direction twice. I think those two things, which are very small and very, very like nondescript, but actually go a long way. So
cool.
Yeah. Matt, you want to, any departing words?
No, just want to say thank you, Vince, for, obviously giving me the opportunity, and to you guys for listening. It has actually been a super effective learning tool for me to go through this and to document my thinking. I think if anything, it's almost re-emphasized what I'm trying to do and made me think about a few other things. So yeah, hopefully, if me sharing that, if it hasn't helped you guys, it's helped me. So there we go.
Maybe we'll give other coaches an opportunity to get on the hot seat a little bit and explain something that they're developing. That might be a kind of a cool way to get everybody that kind of deep reflection, because I do think it's really helpful to do that. So
for sure.
Cool.
Thanks, Vince.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Really helpful. And hey, listen. So I've got the video recorded, so we'll get that online. Share that with anybody. Rewatch it again if you need to. Matt, is it possible for you to post your slides to the event, and then people can download the slides as well?
Perfect.
Cool. We are over time, so apologies. But enjoy your dinners, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, guys.
Still recording, mate.